Hey guys, Nick here. Um, Off the top of my head, I decided I wanted to make a video about inspiration, and sort of go over the things that, I was raised to take stock in about myself and my personality, my personal development, but really like the world around me and how I grew up, contextualizing the world around me, both well, holistically, and sort of the things I was raised to take strong stock in, which were the natural world and the environment and habitat around us. Um, I definitely went to an exceptional K through 12 school, certainly for the area that I grew up in, and I think for a lot of the broader U.S. compared to the school systems. I was in a definite outlier type of a situation with my schooling growing up and that sticks with me today, although, as I think is normal, um, as a young man, an adolescent growing into, the first years of my independence as an adult, 18 through 20, um, with broader exposure to, well, just the things that young adults have to come to grips with, um, working for a living and also still trying to be a hopeful, positive, optimistic, sort of really idealistic young man who wanted to and didn't understand the extent of his ability to affect positive change in the world and be the change you want to see and a million other mantras that I was sort of raised on. Concepts like we are crew, not passenger, was something that was instilled as a sense of camaraderie and a mantra of ownership, from the time that I was like kindergarten age all the way through school. Things like that were taught to me, as well as, um, a partial truth about the fragility of our natural ecosystem here on Earth, although always spun in with optimism and even hands-on learning as to how to holistically interact with the world, like very natural sciences in 1 year of middle school for me was actually going out and sort of maintaining a rototilled field of, fresh tilled, viable, fertile soil in sort of the scrublands where, around where I grew up. Very holistic things, lots of studies into all sorts of animal population, wolves, and lots of natural environmental sciences spun into my education growing up in a hands on way. But nonetheless, as I became a young adult, I definitely experienced a metamorphosis that I wonder if kids today, young Gen Z and Gen Alpha, I wonder if Gen Alpha will face, or if they'll be brought up more up to speed with how I've had to develop, given that the world is way different now than when I was raised. I wonder if kids will sort of, and I suspect that Gen Z and Alpha may more quickly assimilate to this type of a mindset where, I do feel I have wrapped back around from, I think inevitable for me as a very young man, in one sense, crushing of the naively, childish and optimistic, optimistic perspective that comes from a lack of experience and romanticized, idealized teachings that can really crush a person's spirits for a time in your life until or unless you sooner or later eventually reach a point of whatever you might call it, progression, continuation of learning and ideas, or coping. I think the truth lies in both camps, somewhere in the middle. That's what humans have to do is cope in a certain way and adapt our thinking. My thinking has adapted as the years have gone by, almost a decade now from that time in my life. To, something I think I've expressed on here before, a belief system and sort of center core that I would describe as optimistic nihilism. For me, that means sort of framing myself as a tourist on and in, sort of a well, I think we can be honest here. I'll be honest here about what I think. A decaying society and species on a planet that has been punished by us, but a belief of mine that's very comforting, actually. And I think is very spawned from my upbringing and close affiliation and love of and connection to the natural world from the way I was raised. Is also this idea of that's as far as it extends, is really our species and the ones that are unfortunate enough to have been, um, you know, approximate to our timeline in the history of Earth. But nonetheless, I know that, science says and bears out that, I mean, barring the planet being cut in half by a laser or something, the Earth on a long enough time span, even in human years, and compared to the age of the Earth, an incredibly fast blink of an eye, will recover after humanity is gone. Some people hear that and think that it's rooted in like pessimism. For me, and like some of the things that have ever brought me the most worry and fear and anxiety is, you know, the idea of human caused environmental harm, but like even many times more, I think, um, of a human population than we have now could not permanently scar and mar and demolish this planet. And this whole discussion and concept brings me back to and makes me sort of reflect on. I know I'm very inspired by some of these concepts that are woven into the Lord of the Rings series by J.R.R. Tolkien. J.R. George R.R. Martin, not J.R. Tolkien, I believe is correct. I should know. Um, I read the series every year, and obviously that's not being a religious man, his um sort of concept for me that's a huge touchstone and hook in that series is this very kind of a concept of a lot of the religious undertones aside, although they interest me well enough in this narrative, is the narrative of Middle Earth's what would be the word? Diminishing, in many senses. There's a lot of overview in that series in the lore, especially from like higher beings, elves, and the wise and strong of that series, the non-human or greater than human. They focus both on their own diminishing, but also in their lifetimes, the quicker and fluid nature of the diminishing of humans and men, even though the era of men approaches, a shifting from the old to the new, essentially, and how even the wise and the strong are not, you know, impervious to that or immune to it. And I see huge, even for a series and a story and narrative built almost a century ago, or just about a century ago now, that bears out huge, huge, you know, um, like empathetic connections to me in the way that I view the world, and have really sort of helped to inform the way that I've developed about my perspective on the world. So, anyways, reining it back in a little bit, um, that is sort of the belief that I've come to in my recontextualization of understanding the sorry state that currently the world is in and going towards economically, politically, but really the natural world. And the way that I find a cursor of hope, I think I mentioned it earlier, viewing myself like a tourist at the end of the stop, essentially, um, for our species and for the status quo that humans think that they've built for themselves. And I almost view myself like aiming to be and wanting to be a biological recording device to try and understand and see as many different places as I can and understand the ways in which they're changing, but also to try and view those places in the world which really invoke kind of our ancestral memories. If I can get a little out there, I'm not talking about anything supernatural, but biologically, an influence that I believe plays, and I think science would tell you pretty objectively plays a part in our unconscious behavior, something we don't think about a lot consciously, but I think subconsciously it's very rooted in us, very related to the concept of humanity as a species which has a death urge. I think going to places that remind us of our ancestral, natural, simpler patterns of life and behaviors, people, or rather places that are like a mirror into the past. I want to see places like those while they still exist, and get to know the different um all of the different faces and flavors of experience that I as a human can have in the time I'm alive, while I can. And that may sound esoteric to a lot of you, but I think a lot of you listening who would be still listening at this point also probably get exactly where I'm coming from with this. um I would like to hear if there's any, significant amount of younger people in the audience. If this sort of makes sense to you, young adolescents and adults, the ones who are just coming into young adulthood and Gen Z, if this makes sense to you, if these are concepts that are very familiar to you, or you've thought about a lot, and I imagine they would be, like I said, I really wonder what inspires today's generations of kids growing up. And I would think that, it would interest me to know if there will ever be a period in the United States or really where globally um, education might be incorporating um, into its, um, into its curriculum and sort of message to kids. This idea of being visitors on this planet, maybe sort of a reversal or modulation on what I was raised on, the notion of the ability and the viable timeline for still having a preventative or restorative impact on the natural world we'll get to experience. I wonder if there may be more acceptance in the way that kids are raised today, either by their formal education systems or their parents. Certainly, I know that more people in my generation and the younger ones who fall to pessimism will build themselves back up in that same type of influence and perspective. But I think I would be okay with a world where humans are more so taught to be aligned with where our place in the world really is, and that the fragility and really imminent ongoing collapse of the status quos we've always known and the environment which can sustain us increasingly less every year and decade. I wonder if there will be a future focus on teaching kids that our place in that is not, we're not an influence that can change that anymore. So more acceptance might be the approach that kids, I would hope, would come to. I think that a society like that might be able to go out, maybe behaving a little better, sort of an end of times. Um, who knows? Unification of thought and spirit, maybe, by people who are so desperate about the desolation of our world that they have no choice but to um, somehow dig up a wellspring of hope from somewhere, some kind of acceptance, to make their lives not feel vain and their deaths even feel, their eventual deaths feel um, comforting in a sense. Like maybe people who are raised up in a way like that will have a radically different view on death than I feel like, as even from a global, holistically naturalistic sense of the planet and environment we live in, a greater good ultimately, our natural fate being an important part of, the healing of our planet. Um, yeah, okay. There's a video for you guys. Thanks for watching. Let me know what you guys think below. Let me know um how you guys were sort of raised to think about the natural world and our place existentially on the planet and yours individually and how that's changed as you've grown up. And yeah, thank you guys for watching. Have a good one. Bye.